welcome to this Argus podcast. I'm Michael Ball, the editor of Air Daily here at Argus Media. And today we're going to talk about what's been happening recently with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, also known as RGGI, and some of the historic activity that's been taking place in the program's CO2 allowance market as of late. As I'm sure some of our listeners are aware, RGGI is a U.S. cap and trade program, one of the oldest, and it covers power plant CO2 emissions right now from 10 states in the eastern U.S., mostly in the Northeast, with the 11th, Virginia, set to begin participating on July 1st, just about 2 years after, over 2 years after it left the program. Now, the prospect of Virginia's return has sparked some highly interesting trends in the market as of late. And so joining me today is my colleague, Ida Balakrishna, hope I got that right, our RGGI reporter at Argus, to talk about those trends and some of the potential drivers. Great to have you here, Ida.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. So before we dive deeper into some of the market drivers and the policy developments, could you just talk a little bit about what has been going on recently in the secondary market just over the past couple of months?
Yeah, totally. So the RGGI allowance market, the secondary allowance market where allowances are traded through futures contracts on exchanges, experienced a massive historic bull run. And so during the first half of April, futures contracts for December 2026 delivery were circling around $30 per short ton. But then, around mid-April, around when Virginia regulators finalized rules to return to RGGI, prices began to rise pretty drastically. And I mean, daily fluctuations would reach as much as 18%. And December 2026 contracts peaked at $55.20 per short ton on 4th May. So prices have since retreated, but they are still more than twice the cost containment reserve trigger price, that is the CCR triggered price, which for this year is at $18.22 per short ton. So yeah, the RGGI allowance market has been on some of a roller coaster over the past couple of months or so, and it is in no small part due to the prospect of Virginia's return to the program in July.
Right, and that was very surprising news, I think, to myself and to a lot of folks. After you reported it, I think we had some folks in the market question, is Virginia really going to return this quickly?
It really was. And when we first broke the news at around the end of March, the market's reaction was a bit sluggish. I think people needed time to process it. And the news was surprising because I think everyone in the market was expecting Virginia to start participating in RGGI in early 2027. That at the time made the most sense for a couple of reasons. For one, 2027 is the start of a new compliance year, as well as a new control period, which lasts 3 years. Also, 2027 is the year that RGGI states are supposed to begin implementing the changes that they finalized after the latest program review, which was finished last summer. So those changes included a much more stringent decreasing emissions cap extending out to 2037, 2 CCRs that hold a much bigger pool of extra allowances, et cetera, et cetera. So the prospect of Virginia coming in sooner, even just 6 months sooner than expected, kind of caught most of us off guard.
Okay, makes sense. So let's dive a little deeper into Virginia and why the return has led to such a rally in the market. It is a large state, has a significant sources of emissions when it was in the program before, and it was made up a lot of the market. And potentially as important is that it's got a very big data center market. Would you say that's why Virginia's return has boosted a bullish sentiments in the market the way it has?
That's a major part of it, Mike. And Virginia has the largest data center market in the world, let alone the US, and accounts for about 35% of all known hyperscale data centers. And that's according to the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. And so we've all been hearing the discourse on data centers and AI. You can't have a conversation about energy without mentioning either of those things because of how much they're expected to contribute to increasing power demand. And so, yeah, Virginia has definitely been a source of bullishness in the RGGI market because more power demand is likely to result in higher emissions, which would lead to more demand for RGGI allowances. So now pivoting a little bit, let's look at the regulation that Virginia finalized in April to return to RGGI. Right, so it adjusts Virginia's power plant emissions cap for this year to account for its mid-year reentry. So its cap for this year is at just under 11.5 million short tons. Starting from 2027, we do not yet know what Virginia's emissions cap will be because the state regulators are working on a second regulation that would align Virginia with the changes finalized after the program review. And then we also have to look at Virginia's emissions since it left RGGI in 2023, right? So in 2023, the state's power plant emissions totaled about 23.6 million short tons. And then since then, emissions have risen quite steadily to 31.5 million short tons in 2025. And then in the first quarter of this year alone, emissions from power plants that would be covered under RGGI in Virginia reached just over 8 million short tons. So that's already about 3/4 of the state's adjusted emissions cap for this year. So when we factor in all of these things, right? Virginia's data center market, its adjusted emissions cap for this year, recent emissions trends, and the uncertainty over its emissions cap starting from next year, it has led to many people expecting a tight market, at least in the short term.
I see. And so this return in by Virginia in July has fueled the expectations for tight allowance market, and that's what's been leading to the historically high prices as of late.
Yeah, so that seems to be the prevailing expectation among market participants once it became increasingly clear that Virginia was serious about rejoining in July. Participants were probably trying to secure allowances now, anticipating prices to rise in the future. Maybe returning entities in Virginia were also trying to get allowances, and speculators could also have been attempting to capitalize on the volatility in the allowance market. I also think considerations over meeting compliance obligations before the March 2027 deadline could have also been another factor fueling demand for allowances. So the March 2027 deadline is somewhat of a special one because it marks the end of the current control period. So basically by next March, power plants would have to surrender allowances equal to their full 2026 emissions, as well as half of their 2024 to 2025 emissions. And if you look at the recent trends in the market, current year contracts, right? So those for December 2026 and prompt month delivery have been trading at a comfortable premium to forward year, that is December 2027 delivery. So this suggests that demand for getting allowances this year is pretty strong.
Okay, that makes sense. So, kind of looking at the whole thing, Virginia's return to RGGI in July has led to expectations of the market to become tight. And given the state's upward trends in emissions, the data center market, and all of that, which is most likely going to boost power demand, that with the concerns of the compliance obligations next year in March, all that put together really seems to have driven up demand for RGGI allowances.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. So one thing that's still maybe a little confusing is why is the RGGI market reacting so dramatically to this news of Virginia's return? Because sure, it's 6 months earlier than expected, but it also was widely expected that the state would return, especially following last year's election. Is that really enough to spark this massive run up in prices?
That's a really good question, Mike, and that's something that I, as well as other participants and observers, have been wondering as well. I will say the prospect of Virginia's return isn't exactly all that surprising or new. People, including Reggie itself, were aware that there was at least a non-zero chance that Virginia could resume its participation for a while now. The state's exit from Reggie was struck down by a state court in 2024, though former Governor Glenn Youngkin was appealing that decision. And so that chance of Virginia's return became more or less a certainty after Democrat Abigail Spanberger won the Virginia gubernatorial race last November. And one of her campaign promises was to enter RGGI. And so the market had actually rallied after that election, with allowance prices reaching record highs at the time. And so many participants had believed Virginia's return to RGGI was already priced in the market as a result. Plus, the RGGI market has a sizable bank. I think RGGI member states said last month that the bank holds about 60 million allowances. But that being said, I think it's important to remember that market participants are operating on incomplete information, and they have varying ideas about trends in the RGGI market. And people are not rational actors, as much as we'd like to believe that. So it may just be that Virginia's earlier than expected return was surprising enough to make participants pay more attention to the market and potentially hedge their positions to account for any future uncertainty.
Okay, so sounds definitely that Virginia has been a major driver of the RGGI allowance prices in recent weeks. I was just curious, are there other factors that have been driving the market? Are those still at play? I'm thinking about like weather and such, and of course electricity demand, which can be influenced by that.
For sure. Weather patterns have historically been the major driver of the Reggie market. I mean, that's why allowance prices tend to spike during the summer and winter seasons when heating or cooling demand reaches their peak, because power plants are running more and in turn are emitting more. And conversely, during the fall and the spring months, what we call the shoulder season, the Reggie allowance market tends to get bearish because milder temperatures during those periods lends for less power demand and less generation and thus lower emissions. So as we head into the summer months, we can expect strong cooling demand to be a reliably bullish driver of the market, particularly since national weather forecasts project temperatures in the Northeast to rise to higher than normal levels.
Much as it is doing this weekend. So,
Yeah.
uh, so let's pivot a little bit to the auction, which was just held on June 3rd. The results surprised many in the market, didn't they?
Yep, indeed they did. And it's interesting because the auction actually cleared at a record high, $35 per short ton. That is 40% higher than the March auction clearing price, which was around $25 per short ton. But it was much lower than what many participants were expecting. I think many had thought the auction would clear at least closer to secondary market levels, so around the upper 30s or lower 40 range. And so after those results released on Friday, so that is June 5th, prices in the secondary market plunged by about 14 to 16%.
Yeah. That's pretty significant. And why did the auction clear lower than expected?
I think that's something that people, myself included, are trying to figure out. It's a bit difficult to say just a few days after the auction. But one thing I would like to point out is that while the $35 per short ton clearing price was below expectations, it is still high. It is almost twice as high as the CCR trigger price for this year, which we can say is a sort of a soft price ceiling for the market. And while prices in the secondary market fell precipitously on the day the auction results were released, they've started to rebound pretty quickly. December 2026 contracts are now back up at around $41 per short ton. And evidently, the Reggie member states are also taking notice of these high prices because they've said that they're going to start a scoping process to address affordability.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know it's this is true for a lot of programs, and sometimes it's unusual for the states to react maybe this quickly. But what else do we know at this point about the scoping process that they've announced?
Not much. We do know that they intend to solicit stakeholder feedback and explore the kinds of analyses that they can conduct to help promote affordability and ensure Virginia's quote unquote smooth reintegration into RGGI. But we don't know when they intend to formally start this scoping process, what kind of measures or actions that they could take, or how long they expect it to last. And I think also this is a clear signal for participants that the Reggie member states are aware of what's going on with prices in the market and that they are serious about addressing them. It's important to remember, Mike, that most of the potential actions that could be taken must be agreed to by all of the 10 to 11 member states, and that's going to take some time.
Interesting. That sounds like we have some things to look forward to. Well, great. Thanks for talking about the market with me, Ida. I mean, we've got a lot to look forward to in terms of Virginia returning, summer weather, and maybe this scoping process that the states are going to be launching. And we'll definitely be keeping on top of that and the market activity. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hope you had enjoyed this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.